And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. What a crazy day today has been, and you might as well start off with one of the things that caught my attention just a second ago. Evidently, a Democratic candidate for Congress in New Mexico thought it'd be a good idea to, in their 15-second TV ad or in their broadcast, say F the NRA. That's where we are. And the station manager evidently said that the station's not permitted by law to censor what he said or edit this guy's commercial, and that they have to provide equal access to all candidates. So now Pat Davis is now a national name. Congratulations. We not shocked. No, this has been coming for a while. I'm waiting for the day where, the presidential debates are going to devolve into a giant, blank you, no blank you, like a drunken bar brawl. That's kind of what politics are devolving into. And in this case, it's a Democrat who's done it. Now, yesterday, we talked a little bit about this White House aide, this Kelly Sadler, who came out during a meeting when they were talking about Gina Haspel, said about John McCain. He's gonna be dead anyway. Who cares? White House doubling down. They are not going to comment on the remarks. Now, I remember at a time where something like this popped up. Something like this, and it didn't matter the administration. Miss Sadler would be gone. Just for the appearance of it. They would have made a ceremonial firing. They would have moved her somewhere else, but not this administration. And I struggle with the justification. And I guess it depends on your sense of humor. It depends on the sense of humor. Evidently, an official with the White House is saying that it was a joke. It just fell flat. That's all. It was just a bad joke. Didn't get the rim shot. Nothing. And I got to be honest, there's part of me that goes, if that's what your thought of a joke is, I'm struggling. Now, according to the press briefing today, Sarah Huckabee Sanders said that, Sadler still works there. Evidently, she disputed the suggestion that Trump himself was setting the tone, which, come on, it's like anyone with kids. When a kid blurts something out, they didn't just dream it up. It's something that they had heard. And you got to think that this is something that has permeated the White House since the announcement of the brain cancer. Because Trump's clearly not thrilled with McCain, as most people aren't at one point or another. I look at McCain a lot like I look at the ACLU. I don't agree with them. I don't agree with either 100% of the time, and I don't disagree with them 100% of the time. They make me angry, they tick me off, and sometimes I'm okay with what they do. Sometimes I'm happy. It's one of those things, but you got to have some moderate middle view. A little too hawkish for me, but that's another argument. The guy's dying, though. You talk about the humanity of the game, and you say, look, the guy's passing on. Pay him some respect. That, not so much. But Sanders said, certainly it is not. There's not a tone set here. We have a respect for all Americans. And that's something we try to do both in words and action. And I let that sink in. I spent a bunch of time just on that thought. We try to show that respect for Americans in both words and actions. And you start with the most obvious, the whole grab her by the you-know-what tapes, all of the accusations of sexual harassment, all the accusations of cheating people, all the accusations of Michael Cohen being a bag man, and all of the graft and all of the theft and all of the kleptocracy and all of the stories that we're hearing. And again, put everything we know into a big pile right in front of us. And think about everything that we know. And then imagine all of the stuff we don't know. So if you put a big pile on the table, we know about this much. The rest of the table is the stuff we don't know yet, which is enormous. And I look at their actions, and again, it comes back to actions. They gave away a massive amount of tax dollars. Future tax dollars that we could have used for education and healthcare and roads and bridges, and we've been down this path. All of this stuff, there's literally a million things we could have done better than give Jeff Bezos and Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and Carlos Slim and the German company Bayer and the Chinese billionaires. There's a million things we could have done better with the money than give it to them. Can we agree on that? And yet they did that. And now they're going, oh, well, gee, we're sorry, we're broke. We need to start clawing some of that back. We need to start stealing some of that wealth back. And oh, by the way, our actions and how we love all people. We're just kicking people out of the country, and we're even the people we said you could stay, even the people we gave temporary protected status to. And evidently, John Kelly recently did an interview on NPR about TPS. There's some talk of ending temporary protective status for countries like I think it was like Honduras and Sudan, Nicaragua, Nepal, El Salvador, Haiti, countries that are in real disorder. There's talk of ending that status. There's also talk of how do we help the people who have been here for decades stay, and he actually floated the idea of figuring that out, which is pretty amazing. But what got all of the media attention was John Kelly, the White House Chief of Staff's statement that the vast majority of people who have moved here illegally come into the United States. They're not bad people. They're not criminals. They're not MS-13, which you could just see all the Fox News viewers losing their minds because they've been all told that they're horrible people, they're all criminals, and they're all MS-13. So by John Kelly coming out and saying this, is just burst the bubbles of every Trump supporter. He goes on to say, but they're also not people who would easily assimilate into the United States, into our modern society. And, that got a whole bunch of Democrats riled up, especially the Hispanic representatives who, are defending people who pick our crops, are defending the people who are doing the jobs that most Americans won't do, like clean hotel rooms and wash dishes and do the jobs that every group of immigrants has ever done coming into this country. And I look at John Kelly, and John Kelly's a smart guy. Those words, while attempting to be measured, not all that bright. And, in any economy, you do need to have people at the bottom of the scale who are working their way up. You need home health aides. You need people who are going to be your janitors and your cleaners, and you need those people who are making their way through. Those jobs also need to be decent jobs with living wages and some bit of health care and some bit of retirement security and some bit of security and some bit of reward and all of that and opportunity and all of that. But for him to say that these are people who they're just not going to fit into our modern society, it's kind of ludicrous. He then went on to say that they don't speak English and that they're overwhelmingly rural. So all you Trump voters, hey, Trump country. He's talking about you too. Overwhelmingly rural from countries where 4th, 5th, 6th grade educations are kind of the norm. He's saying they're stupid. And we don't want stupid people. And, I listen to that and I go, that sounds an awful lot like Trump. Not sure that would have been John Kelly 3 years ago. So to take this back to where we started, you've got John Kelly, who seems to have gotten a whole bunch of rubbed off on by Trump. There's a bunch of orange on him. And for them to say that this Miss Sadler's comments weren't indicative of the rest, you got to look at all the big picture. And for me to have Kelly say something like this leads me back to Sadler. You know, there's no question that this was said a number of times. There's no question that this is part of their discussions. And what is it? Well, these are distractions. These are important issues, but they're still distractions from the reality of follow the money. And we find out today that evidently, and I said this back on Inauguration Day, who paid for this monstrosity? Where's all of this money coming from that pays for these inaugurations? I've often said, again, it should be part of federal dollars. We should have the little parties, and then you do all of your other stuff, but there should be a government the government party, that's it. The private sector wants to pay for their little parties and do all that. No tax breaks, none of that, no favoritism, none of that. Have your little things. Mueller's evidently probing into foreign connections who may have donated to the inauguration fund. Now, you remember, he brought in over, it was like somewhere between $107 and $110 million, of which he said that, you know, the extra would be given to charity. I'm not sure that that's actually happened. But again, you go, well, where'd all this money come from? And how much money came from Russia? And I had said right from the beginning, these oligarchs, be it from the United States or from Russia or, you know, who knows, everywhere, they all live in their little world. And it's not about borders. It's not about flags. It's not about country. It's not about they care about workers or their people or anything. It's about how to make the most money for themselves. How do they grow their piece of the pie while taking yours? And for me, the idea that you're going to start looking into these is about damn time. Now, I'm not saying I'm a genius. I'm not saying I'm the brightest bulb in the box, but these are questions that any rational person would ask. Who paid for the inauguration? And you got to think that Mueller's been looking into the money from the very beginning. It's always coming back to the money. Stormy Daniels, just kind of the tip of it. Kind of the comic relief, if you will, almost, for all of the seedy underdealings, for all of the criminality. And at some point, the hope is that we all wake up to it. And oh, by the way, remember how Sarah Huckabee Sanders said that, you know, they care about all Americans and they do it in their words and in their actions? Next week kicks off Public Service Recognition Week. And Congress evidently is getting a letter from the administration that is proposing $144 billion in cuts for federal employees. Let that sink in for a second. I mean, today would have been the day to drop that, but to wait till next week to go, you know what? We're gonna thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. Gonna put your arm around and love you guys. You do such great work for our country. You do such great work for the people. Oh, by the way, we're gonna cut your paycheck. We're gonna destroy your pension. We're gonna take your health care away. It's kind of like what we do to veterans. Well, we love you. Let's take a picture. Smile, cheese. And then we're gonna cut money to the VA. And oh, by the way, we're going to fire a bunch of VA employees, especially those at the bottom, the disabled ones, the veterans, you know, those people who served our country and lost a limb, some psychological problems, kick them to the curb. But what do you expect from the guy who outwardly mocked a handicapped reporter? Not much. So, hey, happy Public Service Recognition Week with your pay cut and your firings. And oh, you know what would be perfect? You know what would really top off next week? That's right. The Supreme Court to release their decision on the Janus case. That would literally be the cherry on the top. That would literally be the biggest knife in the back this administration and the Republican establishment could do to working people and the people that they're recognizing next week. Just a thought. I'm gonna take a quick break. When we come back, you remember the whole tariff thing? And I've said from the beginning, I'm in favor of certain tariffs. I'm in favor of having trade deals that we negotiate that actually benefit us instead of saying, hey, borders open, go. My next guest is going to talk about Congress pursuing a piece of legislation that would undo Trump's tariff talk, where he is right now, and actually benefit not just American companies, but foreign companies as well. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, Michael Graybell is going to be here to share his thoughts and his most recent article over at ProPublica. Quick break, right back. Stick around.
Oh, 90% of the wealth, 10% of the people. Oh, 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people. Oh, 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1967. That was the day United Farm Workers Sons of Zapata joined with the Confederation of Mexican Workers in establishing an international picket line across the Rio Grande Valley. A push to organize farm workers at 6 major growers began the year before, in the spring of 1966. Wages in Starr County ranged from 40 to 85 cents an hour. Farm workers began their strike in June of 1966 for wage increases and union recognition. But growers would rather see their crops rot than recognize the union. They did grant wage increases, but immediately ran to the courts for injunctions. One district judge outlawed all picketing, while police instructed county workers to spray the strikers with insecticide. That August, workers voted to organize with the United Farm Workers and began a pilgrimage march to the state capitol to popularize their cause. 15,000 workers and their supporters reached Austin on Labor Day to demand their right to organize. They returned to Starr County to continue their strike. The growers turned to Mexican commuters holding green cards to break the strike. The United Farm Workers began picketing at Roma and Rio Grande City bridges and were often successful in turning back green card workers. By May 1967, melon harvest had begun. After months of negotiations, picket lines went up on both sides of the international bridges. The picketing was 100% successful for 2 days, but the Mexican government and Starr County Sheriff's Department soon intervened to break up the picket lines. Texas Rangers were brought in to arrest and brutalize strikers. The strike was broken, but organizing continued throughout the region. Picketing across borders was itself an important act of international solidarity. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So, I've taken a lot of heat over the last couple of months over the tariffs. I am a supporter of reining in the insane trade deficits we have with China mostly. But our trade policy is, in my view, way out of whack. And it is the one thing, and yes, there is one thing I agree with Donald Trump on, that we have given away our manufacturing base. For those of us who are my age, 50, I remember buying the very things that I buy today, but buying them when they were made here in the U.S. And for too long, we've seen jobs fleeing this country and then the products coming back, which is why I thought it was interesting. I read an article over at ProPublica that pointed out that while Trump's talking about tariffs, you've got Congress moving in a direction that may completely undo that. Which is why I've asked Michael Graybell to come talk with us. He's a reporter over at ProPublica, and he's written this great article on this topic. Michael, thanks for taking time for us.
Glad to be here.
So am I getting this right? You get the Trump rhetoric is, hey, we're going to slap tariffs on ProPublica, and he's written this great article on this topic. Michael, thanks for taking time for us.
Glad to be here.
So am I getting this right? You get the Trump rhetoric is, hey, we're going to slap tariffs on these Chinese products coming into the U.S., and you've got both Republicans and Democrats in Congress going to undermine that?
Right. The story I wrote about was about this piece of legislation called the Miscellaneous Tariff Bill, which sounds extremely boring, but is actually probably the only time we're going to make laws about things like vertical waffle makers and multi-cookers and all these different products that we know about. But the basic idea is that this bill is supposed to be about helping U.S. manufacturers compete by making it cheaper to get the raw materials they need to make their products in the U.S. It's supposed to support U.S. manufacturing. But many companies have figured out that they can also use it to eliminate the taxes they pay to bring in completely finished products that require no American manufacturing and can simply be sent to store shelves. Things like fishing rods and microwaves and many other things that I read about in the story.
How can you possibly say that, those finished products that you laid out are anything close to raw materials? Because I'm not against the idea of bringing in raw materials, tariff free, because we turn those into finished products, and that's where the value added part is. How do you get from we're gonna do that for raw materials to these finished products?
Well, the law is written very broadly, and even though that's the intent is raw materials, the law just says that there can't be a competing U.S. manufacturer. So that's the way a lot of these companies are getting around that.
Right, but here's the thing: what if, and you write about this in the article? What if there are no competing manufacturers because they've all left?
Exactly. Well, so what we did is we took some data and analyzed it and found out there's a lot of companies that used to make these products in the U.S. that closed factories and have turned around and said nobody makes it in the U.S. anymore. There's no competing U.S. manufacturer, so we should be able to get a tax break or eliminate the tariff on this product. One of the companies I read about is a company called Leviton, which makes, if you look around at the room you're in any, they make the electrical outlets that are in all homes and offices around the world. And they have closed down 4 factories since 2005, laid off about 1,000 workers, and moved a lot of that production to Mexico and China. And they now have several requests in to bring back some of those electrical outlets that they're making in China and not have to pay the tariff on them. So there's lots of examples like that. I read about Nautilus, which is the fitness equipment company. They are asking for these waivers on a lot of cardio equipment, this thing called the Tread Climb, or all this cardio equipment that they make. Well, back in 2008, they were making a lot of this stuff out of plants in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they closed down that factory and moved the production to China. So in speaking to some of these workers who used to do this, a lot of them see this as kind of double dipping, taking advantage of the less regulations and cheaper labor overseas, and at the same time not having to pay the cost of doing business overseas.
Yeah, and now you've got Congress trying to put a loophole in that they created the crisis to begin with, and now they're going to benefit from it on both ends, which again, is what I got to be honest, is what I think. In 2016, the anger that you saw in cities all across this country, especially rural areas, that that one factory is what propped up the entire local economy. That was very real, and I talk about this often. Trump was able to tap into the fact that communities have been left behind, not just jobs lost, but their entire identities gone. And while I don't agree with any of his other policies, this is the blind squirrel finding a nut.
Right. Yeah. A lot of the people in Washington have overlooked kind of the heavy localized impacts. I mean, they're localized impacts, but for that community, they're very heavy. And a lot of people in Washington and Wall Street have overlooked that over the years, and that obviously contributed a lot to President Trump's victory.
Yeah, we had done a labor history tour back in 2013, and we went through a bunch of places, and you see all of these skeletons of industries past in this country. And we went through Toledo, Ohio, and at one point Toledo was the glass capital of the world, and there's a glass museum there, and I still can't believe it, but the glass museum honoring our past, being the glass capital of the world, all the glass in the museum made in China.
Wow, really?
I mean, and I remember going, but how is that possible? And they go, we don't have a manufacturer in the U.S. who can make this kind of glass anymore.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that they say. I mean, so some of the products in the bill, I'll give you a kind of a list of different things that they have here. but things like baby strollers, hiking boots, boxing gloves, coffee makers, toasters, plastic spoons and forks, nicotine gum, pet toys, pajamas, leather belts, sweaters, glass vases, there you go, basketballs, unicycles. So these are all things that companies say we don't, are no longer made in the U.S. Anymore, and that as a result, they shouldn't have to pay the tariffs on them.
Yeah, because we need a massive import of unicycles. What are there, like 100 people in this country who can actually ride a unicycle? But here's the thing: every one of those things that you labeled there, when I was a kid, and it isn't that long ago. We're looking at 70s, 80s. All of that stuff used to be made here. Every toy that I had as a kid. In fact, when we were going through my grandparents' attic, there were all my toys from when I was a kid, and they were all made in the U.S. They were made in places, like in Massachusetts or Vermont or Illinois. They were all made here, and now you cannot find a toy made in this country to save your life.
Right, and it's interesting to talk to some of the people who are supporting this. I spoke to some of the trade lawyers who said, well, it's all that one of the arguments was that number one, that lowers prices for consumers, but number two, that it's only because that companies have been able to source stuff in other countries that they've been able to maintain some U.S. manufacturing in the U.S. because of the rise of some of the emerging economies like China. And the other thing that they point out is that a lot of us, we can drive around and see the very real damage of a closed factory. But it's a lot harder to envision that because we're buying such cheap clothes, we have extra money to spend elsewhere that may be generating jobs in other parts of the economy. You can't entirely discount that argument, but
no, you can't.
What you're saying is correct.
No, you can't. But I'm willing to pay an extra couple of pennies for something to make sure that my neighbor has a job.
Right.
I mean, and I see those. I grew up in a place where you had an auto industry that was booming. That at the time was creating thousands of jobs in ancillary industries. And they had tons of feeder plants. You drive down Brook Park Road in Cleveland, and the Ford and the Chevy plant were there, and there were hundreds of factories that fed into that paid decent wage jobs, and those are all gone. Everything up and down that entire stretch is gone. And I get your argument, but at the end of it, those are people.
It's not my argument. I'm just passing along the argument of people I spoke with, right?
I get that argument as well, but at the end of it, if you're not producing something, you're just consuming, and I got to be honest, you cannot be just a consumer nation.
Right. This is a real difficult challenge, I think, for our leaders to deal with. And one of the things I think the article highlights is this dynamic where there is. It's hard to tell what the trade policy is from one day to the next.
Right.
The president has said that we're at times that we're going to rejoin the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and the next day he tweets that we're not going to. There's these, there are tariffs on steel and aluminum. At the same time, there are also a lot of exemptions. There's going to be exemptions for some of the major countries that supply that. So, and it's also kind of interesting to look at, the tariffs would obviously help the people who work in steel mills, but then hurt a lot of the workers who rely on that imported steel to make machines and other products. So it's a long way of saying, what's really interesting to me and what we're trying to look at is where are companies and others and countries playing games with our trade laws, where it's not a sort of cohesive, well thought out strategy, but it's whoever has the purse, whoever has the money, is able to sort of bend the rules or bend the enforcement actions to their benefit.
Right. And I remember Donald Trump on the campaign trail saying day one he was going to label China as a currency manipulator. And I think that would be a huge push in making them, kind of level out their currency instead of manipulating it in the way that they've been doing it to make their imports much cheaper than ours.
Right. And I think some of his advisors have said that they're not doing it as much as they used to, but obviously these things are also factors.
We're not doing it as much. We're not doing as much as we used to.
Or may not be doing it. Yeah.
We're still doing it, but not as bad as we used to. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And at the end of this, I think we as a country have to wake up to the reality that all of this stuff is aimed at China. We've got trade balance with a lot of countries who are on similar tracks to where we are. It's China that's been the one that's just been eating our lunch. What was our trade deficit last year? $375 billion with them alone.
Right.
And that money, as we as a country having the world reserve currency, has to come back here. So what are they doing? They're not buying our products. They're literally buying us.
Yeah, I mean, they were sort of the biggest in this bill. There's about 400 products, finished products, alone from China. I mean, one of the great examples that I mentioned in this story is one company here wants to lower tariffs on electric vehicles from China. If you remember, it was just 9 years ago the Obama administration spent billions of dollars trying to build an electric vehicle industry in the United States. So you have that, number one, going on. Number two, the president's own trade representative has said that he wants to target electric vehicles for higher tariffs. So Congress wants to lower tariffs at the same time the trade representative wants to increase those tariffs, because China has said, as part of its Made in China 2025 industrial policy, that they would like to invest a lot of resources and become a leader in this industry in the future.
No, I mean, look, they as a communist government, they have the vision to be able to do things, 25 years down the road, and think about which industries they want to target and in a very mercantilist style take over. And they've done it to us on a number of industries, solar panels being one of them. At one point we were the leader, somehow not so much anymore. And it comes back to, in my view, these insane trade policies. Let me ask you this, because one of the things that you pointed out about the waivers that you were looking at, you said that you had compared 1,662 waiver requests, and over from 1975 until now, those companies requesting those waivers, you're saying about 175,000 jobs were lost. The interesting caveat I saw was about 150,000 of those have been in the last decade. Am I getting that right?
Right. It's two different ways of measuring it. One is looking at the companies alone have eliminated about 175,000 jobs due to outsourcing and competition from foreign imports since 1975. We also look separate from the companies. We looked at industries. So these particular industries where they're requesting these waivers have been particularly hard hit by trade. So just in the 10 years alone, looking at industries, which is a bigger set than just companies, it's 150,000 jobs.
Okay. So let me ask you, because I want to go back a second to something you said real quick. The argument that, we have extra money and we're able to create other jobs. Do you think the job losses would be less angering if we as a society had a more robust social safety net, that people didn't fall as far down when they lose these jobs? Because look, I've known people who've lost good paying factory jobs, good paying manufacturing jobs, and they've never come anywhere close. I mean, I talked to the one steel worker who, 30 years ago was making, $25 an hour. He's now making $8 an hour as a nurse's aide. Is that an avenue that people are potentially looking at? Better transfer payments to make that down much less, or is this just
right?
Where we are is where we are.
No, I mean that's a very real problem. I mean one of the things I looked at in this story is trade adjustment assistance. There's something I'm interested in learning a lot more about. If any of your listeners have stories, please send them my way at michael.graybell@propublica.org. But what I'm interested in is, this is supposed to help bridge that gap. That not only that workers would be retrained, that workers would be given an incentive to relocate if for some reason there's no way to help the town anymore, to go to a place where and an industry where there are jobs that are growing. But one of the things that we're seeing is those jobs that were lost tend to be union jobs, had higher pay than the jobs that are available to go into, even with that training. For someone, in the story I read about a guy named Tom Kiefer who came out of high school in 1984, was able to get a job at the factory where his father worked, this Leviton factory in Warwick, Rhode Island, and went into an apprenticeship program that trained these completely unskilled high school graduates to make machines. Nowadays, how many companies still have apprenticeship programs?
None that I know of.
How many companies will hire people at 18 and train them to do a skill that they don't have? So I mean, so this was kind of a very different place. You know, he was able to get back on his feet after a few years, but those kind of jobs don't exist anymore. And so, who's going to provide that training if the companies aren't doing it?
This is where I've always said, if the private sector can't or won't do it, this is where we, the people, we as through our government, have to step in and do some of these things. So, last question I've got for you: what are the chances of this piece of legislation actually passing, getting to Trump's desk? Because I got to imagine he's going to veto it if it gets to his desk.
Well, so right now it passed the House, amazingly, at 402-0. So no opposition. So one would think that it would sail through with the Senate. It has run into some headwinds in the Senate with people raising these questions about whether there should be so many finished products in the bill. At one point, the U.S. Trade Representative did send a letter expressing some concerns about the items in the bill, but then withdrew it. So it's kind of unclear what the Trump administration thinks about this bill. I think a lot of people don't realize that there are so many finished products and see it as it's being promoted as something that contains raw materials that's going to help U.S. manufacturers. So right now, what I'm told is that it's headed for a voice vote in the Senate in the next few weeks, and you know, who knows? That the president has expressed different views at different times. So I don't think we can definitively say that he would just veto it.
It's a good point. We don't know from minute to minute where the mind is going, or if it's gone at all. Well, we'll see. But Michael, I appreciate the story. I appreciate the conversation, and I look forward to keeping an eye on this as it moves down the road.
Thanks, Rick. Anytime.
Good stuff. Michael Graybill. He is a reporter over at ProPublica. We'll get a link out at thericksmithshow.com of how you can check out this article. Well worth the read. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1894. That was the first day of the Pullman strike. The strike started in the company town of Pullman, on the south side of Chicago, where workers made luxury sleeping cars for passenger trains. As a depression swept the nation, workers had seen their wages slashed, but rents owed to the company owner George Pullman stayed the same. The strike won support from the American Railway Union and its leader, Eugene V. Debs. The American Railway Union called for a boycott of all Pullman cars, and more than 250,000 railway workers participated in the work action against Pullman. The strike was crushed by legal injunctions and with federal troops. In a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court, Eugene V. Debs was imprisoned for his support of the boycott. One prominent supporter of the strike was Chicago area Reverend William H. Cardawine. The Reverend supported the strikers from his pulpit. After the strike, his book, The Pullman Strike, helped spread the word of Pullman. In it, he warned, "We as a nation are dividing ourselves, like ancient Rome, into two classes, the rich and the poor, the oppressor and the oppressed. On the side of the oppressor, there is power and protection, class legislation, and military support. We are following in the tracks of ancient Rome," he wrote, "instead of learning lessons from her failures and defeats. No country can prosper, no government long perpetuate itself and its institutions, which does not administer judgment and justice alike to all its people." These words from Reverend Carwadine seem more relevant than ever today. Will we heed his warning? Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Your proud defender of the working class majority, Rick Smith.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. You know, kind of to follow up on that, you know, I was in talking with Michael, you know, and look, the trade issue is a hotly contested one, because you've got the free traders going, well, no, you see, we've made the rest of the world lives better, and we're better off because we get cheap prices, and people and poor people benefit the most, and that whole line of thought. And I go, perhaps a little bit. But imagine that we've lost entire industries that used to employ thousands and thousands of people. And I spent a little time, just thinking about, when I was a kid, the toys and the products that we had that were made here in the U.S. And they were, somehow we figured out how to produce them and make them affordable for people to have. Like Barbies, for instance. Every girl I knew going through school had a Barbie. Now kids have 10 of them. Sorry, do you need 10? You think about bicycles. Huffy Bicycle was made in Ohio. They used to employ people in Ohio and Missouri and Mississippi. They're all gone. And, I had Senator Byron Dorgan on the program a couple years ago, and he was pointing the finger at Walmart, because Walmart's pushing all these companies, and the story of the dill pickle and all of this stuff, and how the size of the packaging Walmart was demanding. And it just forced everyone to China. And Walmart was a huge driver, yes. But it's this, this idea on the absolute lowest price without thinking about the big picture. It's like, one of the astronauts was famous for, before they went up into space, he looked over at the other guy, goes, lowest contractor got the bid. And you think about that. What corners did they cut? What cheap material did they use? And I think about that every time I drive over a bridge. Lowest contractor got the bid, got the contract. How much did they water down the concrete? But again, you go through this, and Huffy Bike was gone. Schwinn Bike was, what could be more Americana than those? Gone. In fact, they left Chicago, I guess, sometime in the 90s, and now they're in China. You think about the toys, though. Fisher Price, founded in New York in 1930, was making toys all through when I was a kid. Now, most of them, I guess, made in China. Etch and Sketch, which was made in Ohio. Ohio Art Company was one of those, now made in China. G.I. freaking Joe. Every boy I knew had a G.I. Joe with the Kung Fu grip and everything. Now made in China. And if G.I. Joe isn't bad enough, the American Girl doll, made in China. And you just go through this. And I mean, Mattel was a huge, an enormous company. But, 2002, that's it. No more toys made in the U.S. Closed its last American factory, everything in China. And by I guess it was like 2007, they were making more than 65% of all the toys that they produced in China. And I'm sure it's higher now. And it's not just toys. I mean, you think about the tools, Black & Decker, the iconic American name, Black & Decker, made in China. Now owned by Stanley Works, which evidently moved a bunch of its production there as well. Craftsman. When you thought about tools, you thought about the crafts. Up until about 2004, 2005, they were saying made exclusively in the U.S. And now Sears has sold them off in China or who knows where. I mean, you think about the iconic stuff like Levi jeans, American jeans. And back during the Cold War, everyone wanted American jeans. You can't find a pair of American-made jeans in this country. There are a couple still left, and I still get them, but mail order. You can't go to your local store and have the choice right in front of you. Because I argue that if you had the choice right in front of you, pay a couple of pennies more for a pair of American-made jeans over the Chinese jeans, people would buy them. But sadly, we don't get that choice. And the other thing is, and I've been. You think about the American flag. Now, all the other stuff that you can put aside, the toys, the bikes, the tools, the jeans, you name it. And you just go around your house and see all the things that are made in China. Most of that has come since 2001 forward. Since they were given permanent normal trade relations, brought into the WTO, they have basically owned us. And I shouldn't even say that. We gave it to them. because we had greedy American companies who saw cheap exploitable labor, who saw lax environmental regulations, and they saw a country that was willing to give them huge amounts of subsidies. So they saw profits. They saw dollar signs in their eyes. So our American capitalists, they're the ones who have sold this country out. The Donald Trumps of the world. Because remember, Donald Trump had the ties and the shirts and all the stuff that he slapped his name on, all made in China. And if you've ever seen the David Letterman clip, I mean, it's reality. It's perfect. And he was clearly not concerned then, and I would argue really not all that concerned now. It's just a ruse, if you will. But I look at this stuff and again, I remember the times when everything we bought was made by our neighbors or someone here, and that you knew that those were jobs that were needed in this country. And when we did our labor history tour, one of the things that really, really grabbed me is you drove around through these communities that were abandoned, and just left to rot. Michael Moore has a great page in his one book where there's a picture of the Oklahoma City bombing and a picture of the Flint, Michigan auto plant, and they look exactly the same. One was blown up by a terrorist bomb. Another one was left behind by a terrorist corporation. And the effects are the same. I would argue what was left behind after Flint was much more devastating to the community. And look where they are today. And you stop and you look at this stuff and you go, by taking this stuff away, by us as a country going, sure, go on over to China, knock yourself out. What we've done is we've abandoned these communities. And no wonder people are angry. No wonder people are who have lost their identities are lashing out. And, you stop and you think about all of the development and all. And, during the election, Donald Trump was saying we'd lost something like 60,000 factories. And that's absolutely true. Since 2001, we have lost 60,000 manufacturing, almost 4 million jobs. And you go, those were productive jobs. Those were mostly good union-paying jobs that supported families, that supported communities, that supported schools, that supported, this country. And, they didn't all go out of business. In fact, we know where most of them are. They were either bought up or they ran away, and they went to China. They went to places with really cheap, exploitable labor, and our politicians allowed that. And in fact, our politicians encouraged that. And I remember back in I think it was like 90, 91, I read this really great book, and it's worth looking up even today. It was by two journalists from Philadelphia, and their names escape me, but the book was called America, What Went Wrong. And the one story that they told was of the last rotary phone manufacturing plant in the country, and how they made the greatest rotary phone in the world. But the company, and I forget the company's name, I'd have to go back and check. But the company, made the push button phone. They upgraded new technology, push button phone, no more dial, no more brrr, brrr, no more of that nonsense. It was beep, 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 beep. But they didn't upgrade the factory. They just closed it, and they moved the production of that product overseas. And that was pretty much the beginning of the end of phone production in the U.S. because we used to produce our own stuff. Now, find a phone made in the U.S. You'd be easier to find Waldo. And the sad reality is phones aren't the only thing. Try and find an American-made TV. Try and find an American-made computer. Try and find American-made clothing. Try and find American-made tools. Try to just go down the list of all of the things that we use every day. And then think about it. Where can I find an American-made version of this? You can't. And the right will say, well, this is back to economics 101. It's rice and beans, Rick. The countries that can produce the most and do it the best, they should be able to do it. And you go, okay, on paper, let's flesh that out. What do you do with all those people who no longer have jobs? Sure, we've got cheap goods, arguably. What if you don't have any money? You think of all those 4 million workers and their families who lost jobs. And very few of them got jobs making the money that they were or better. Most of them made half of what they were making before. So they are struggling just to make it to tomorrow. They're no longer the consumers that can consume products. So what does it matter to them? What does it matter to people who don't have the resources to be able to consume cheap products? Sure, some people are doing really wildly well. And again, this goes back to what I learned in high school government. Government decides who gets what. And we've decided that the well-to-do and the ones who are doing well in our economy, they should have all of the assets, all of the opportunity. Buy all the cheap crap from China that you can possibly buy. And those who don't have the power, you're going to suffer. And to hear, you can go back to the 2012 election, Mitt Romney mocking 47% of the people who don't pay federal taxes. Didn't mock any of the corporations that don't pay any federal taxes, just those working people. Those 47% of people who would love to pay federal taxes. And you go, that's ridiculous, Rick. No, they would love to, because that means they were making more money. And the sad thing about it is our trade deals are just, this is where I agree with Trump, they're terrible. And one of the reasons that I think Hillary Clinton lost is nobody believed she was going to stay out of the TPP. And to be honest, I don't think Trump's going to stay out of it. I think there's going to be a moment where Trump finds his way into it, but for a different reason, China being that reason. But we shall see. The other thing, and Jim just sent me an email saying, Rick, you forgot the most iconic toy of all. And how could I possibly forget the Radio Flyer wagon? How could I have forgotten Radio Flyer, which was, just an iconic toy when I was a kid? I think when my oldest daughter was born, we got one of the last Radio Flyer wagons with the big old tires, and before they moved overseas. And now, all production's done overseas. It's no longer an American product in my view. But this is where we've gone. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Is there a better way? Were you happy with the trade deals we have? Is Trump on the right track? Where should we go? What should we do? Love to hear it. Rick at thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
They can never be defined as yesterday. There's a brand new sham today.
Uncovering the con in conservatism. Rick Smith.
From Boston, Massachusetts, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes. In a possible sign of warming relations between Israel and Russia, the Kremlin has backed off plans to send advanced anti-aircraft missile systems to Syria, a threat Russia made last month following U.S. airstrikes on chemical weapons facilities belonging to the Assad government. A Russian government spokesperson said Friday that the Assad government has everything it needs and that the S-300 surface-to-air missiles weren't needed after all. The same spokesperson denied the timing of that announcement had anything to do with the visit to Russia by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu this week. But in contrast to the U.S., which has only staged 2 high-profile attacks on the Assad government, Israeli jets have repeatedly launched strikes within Syria and have been targeting Iranian militia positions within the country in recent days. And French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire said Friday that European parties to the Iran nuclear deal plan to take up legislation at the European Commission to prevent the imposition of sanctions on Iran, so long as the country continues to abide by the 2015 nuclear deal. In heated remarks in a radio interview on Friday, Le Maire said Europe deserves the same economic sovereignty the U.S. endows to itself, and he said Europe shouldn't be a vassal to the United States, forced to obey whatever decisions are made in Washington. Le Maire added that a host of major French businesses, including the drug maker Sanofi, food conglomerate Danone, and car maker Peugeot, could each come under fire as a result of reimposed U.S. sanctions, and he said he'd reached out to U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin to try and secure exemptions to allow those companies to keep on doing business. Trump administration officials have thus far dodged questions about the extent to which Washington is willing to punish American allies and foreign companies for continuing to trade with Iran in accordance with the nuclear deal. Luke Vargas, Boston, Massachusetts.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Yes, waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations, especially American-made flags. And Janice sent me an email reminding me that in 2014, we actually passed legislation that said that all flags for military use had to be made in the U.S. The fact that you've got to pass a piece of legislation that says that if the military is going to use a flag, it has to be made in the U.S. is really quite remarkable to me. I mean, just it's one of those things that just it's almost mind-boggling how you could possibly allow someone else to produce your flag. And this is where, you know, the right wingers, the people who, you know, who want to make the flag, you know, an icon or you know, worship it as almost an idol. You know, and to their credit, to some of their credit, actually follow the flag code. And there's a whole bunch, and you should really look up and read through the flag code. Like, you can't leave it up at night without being under light. You can't leave it out in the rain. You can't let it touch the ground. You can't let it be tattered. You can't wear it as clothing. You can't do a whole bunch of stuff if you go through the flag code. But we, never mind that. It's just all about the rhetoric. And I think we should amend the flag code that say no one in the world should be allowed to make our flag and sell it in our borders. You want to make our flag and sell it in your country, you go right on ahead. But in our own country, no thanks. We should be making our own flag. Kind of, just, to me, that's like the barest of bare minimums. And, you know, I've had these trade conversations for a very long time. And, you know, I always get, well, you know, should they be allowed to sell their products there? And I'm a big fan of domestic production, domestic consumption. You go back to the original Adam Smith ideas of trading. You produce what you need, you trade what you can't. You produce what you can and what you need, and you trade for the things that you can't make, that you don't have the specialty to do. That makes sense. For instance, you know, Pennsylvania is it's impossible to grow pineapple in Pennsylvania. We definitely need to trade for pineapple. Huge fan of pineapple. We should trade something for it. We have a lot of agricultural goods. We could trade, but we don't trade. What we're doing is we're just buying stuff that we used to make here, being made somewhere else. To me, it's really that. It comes down to being that simple. And the frustrating part of it is it's not getting any easier. And as Michael Graybell earlier pointed out, 402-0 on the tariffs, the tariff waivers. Just is what it is. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk with Larry Prophet. He's running for state rep in the great state of Tennessee on an education platform. Can't wait to hear what he's got to say. Quick break. Right back.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1894. It was the first day of the Pullman strike. The strike started in the company town of Pullman on the south side of Chicago. George Pullman made his fortune making luxury sleeping cars for passenger trains. His cars revolutionized the rail industry, making long-distance travel a much more pleasant experience. Pullman founded a model town for his employees. In 1893, an economic crash devastated the U.S. economy. Pullman egregiously lowered the pay of his workers by as much as a third. But he did not lower rents in the company town, and did not decrease the dividends he paid to his stockholders. Outraged, the Pullman employees called for a strike. The strike was led by the American Railway Union and its leader, Eugene V. Debs. When the union held its convention in Chicago that June, the delegates voted to boycott any train that included a Pullman car. More than 250,000 railroad workers in 27 states and U.S. territories supported the boycott. Angry businessmen demanded demanded that something be done. President Grover Cleveland promised intervention if any train carrying U.S. mail was halted by the boycott. Railroad owners quickly attached mail cars to as many trains as they could. President Cleveland declared, if it takes every dollar in the U.S. Treasury and every soldier in the United States Army to deliver a postcard in Chicago, that postcard shall be delivered. Federal troops brutally crushed the strike. 30 people died and more were injured. A federal injunction was filed against Eugene Debs, and he went to jail for 6 months for refusing to stop his support of the boycott. The Pullman strike marked a new level of federal intervention against the cause of labor. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
Silent teacher, hold my hand. Lead me to the promised land I go. Silent teacher, please define is ordinary.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Interesting story out of Tennessee. Back at the end of April, there was a state representative there, Republican by the name of Sebi Kumar, who basically came out and said that, you know, the standardized testing is fine, has some problems, some glitches, and, you know, basically we want kids to be winners, not whiners. Stop whining. Stop whining about all the problems. And it caught my attention. It's one of those things that you go, exactly, is that the right way to go about things? I don't think so. I am not a fan of standardized testing, especially the high-stakes tests that we see that have gripped our education system, and it's something we should be doing away with. And here to talk about that and the story here in Tennessee and his run for Tennessee State Senate, I've asked our good friend Larry Prophet to come talk with us, one of our favorite badass teachers. Larry, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, no problem, Rick. Always glad to be able to get on your show and talk about issues.
So who is this guy?
Dr. Kumar is a longtime resident of Robertson County. He is a surgeon, very well-respected gentleman in the community, serving his 4th year in the Tennessee House of Representatives for District 66, which encapsulates just Robertson County. He is, some of his campaign donations you might recognize come from Americans for Children, you know, lobbyists out of D.C., Americans for Priority, some of those things. But he quite frankly was in the legislature when Tennessee approved a state charter authorizer, which created an authorizer through the State Board of Education that could override local school boards on their decision to allow or disallow charter schools. His daughter is actually on the board of directors of a charter school applying here in Robertson County now. So he told our local union president that lives in Robertson County after the last election that the teachers needed to stop fighting vouchers, that vouchers were coming, and there was nothing they could do about it. And so being one of those teachers who organizes against those things, and we beat those vouchers back for a while, I'd heard enough. And when a friend shared the letter with me, and I saw, and there's a line in that letter, Rick, that says, I want you to do me a favor now. I want you to rise to your calling. And quite frankly, if you're an educator anywhere in the United States, in a public school, where we take every child and we take those children, try to inspire them to go where they need to go to be great in society, it was an insult to me, and it's been an insult to the teachers of Robertson County and Tennessee.
Yeah.
Because we rise every day, Rick. So we don't have to be asked to rise to our calling.
Amazing. And, you know, the American Federation for Children that you pointed out, Betsy DeVos group, Just so people get the context here. You're talking about a legislator who's taking money from someone who wants to destroy public education.
Exactly. And so we get back to what you and I originally talked about this call to be, the testing debacle. And so as my campaign started this year, and I've kind of waited until, school's in its waning moments, I looked at my website from 2 years ago when I ran unsuccessfully, but it was the first time I'd done anything like that. I am a teacher, so my budget's not very high. On my website from 2 years ago, guess what the story was? It was the Tennessee testing debacle. And so for 4 years now, our taxpayers have paid $30 million a year or more to have a test system come in and fail for 4 years in a row. And the word that the government always wants to throw at our educators and our school systems and our children is accountability.
Right.
Yet they're not very quick to look in the mirror and say, hey, we need to stop wasting people's money on this high-stakes testing that's created so much anxiety and depression among our student body.
You're just being a whiner, Larry. All I hear is whining.
Oh, hey, look, you know what? I had a friend suggest that the teachers need to put signs in their yards, fighters, not whiners. Our kids mean more to us than you. And so I said, hey, you guys go with that if you want to do it. But that's the way some people look at it, Rick. Somebody like me who spends every snow day at the Capitol and who spends evenings there and was monitoring things right up to the end of legislation this year after midnight when the House and Senate closed down, working on a bill that would disallow scores from this year's testing. And the House had a bill that said they will not count for all these things, but the Senate would not approve that bill. And so they got a weaker version that says no adverse things come about, but it defines adverse in that bill as grading the school or putting the school in the achievement district.
Right, but not the kids' scores.
Right, the scores for the school, but it doesn't say it will disallow scores for use in a teacher evaluation or on student grades. And since the Department of Education in Tennessee, a Bill Haslam appointed staff, they love those scores, and they're the ones that upload the scores automatically into the evaluation system and send them to the schools. There are a lot of directors of school here in Tennessee who are waiting to see what's going to happen. So we're at a standstill 2 years later in another Tennessee testing debacle.
That's amazing, and you're not alone. I mean, this happening all over the place. And I look at here in Pennsylvania where, and we've opted our kids out of the standardized tests for the last, I guess it's been several years now, six. We've opted them out of the tests because, look, I don't see the value in them. I'm sorry, they're not helping my kids learn. They're not helping evaluate what my kids know. It makes no sense to me that they take a test in March and April and don't get the results until November. There's nothing in this that I think is positive for kids. So to me, it's not about being a winner or a whiner. It's about the usefulness of the test and the use of the resources that it costs that we're paying these corporations who have made these proprietary tests that they're cashing in mightily off of. That's what it's about for me.
That's exactly right. And parents are lining up now, and that's what's going to happen, Rick. I know that you've watched as these teachers, we got a lot of sick teachers over in North Carolina. They're not feeling well right now, so they're missing some school. And you had these teachers are just at the boiling point over the misuse of resources, lack of resources. Right now, Metro Nashville, they're completely underfunded, and that's not my district, but that's Tennessee. And if you're going to run for House in Tennessee, there are 99 votes that represent all the people of Tennessee. But they're underfunded. They've just found out this year that they're going to be cut extremely back. And the city has even reduced what they're going to put into the school budget and the state doesn't fund the budget fully. And so we're using money for all the wrong causes and all the wrong reasons. You're right. If people know what real educators do, we assess our children every day in multiple ways. It's not always on a standardized test. When you look at what people are forced to do as teachers, and you know, this is a rarity because I don't have tenure, but I still speak out because the children are more important than anything a legislator can tell me over paying millions of dollars to a test company. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Right.
That we're going to sit here and you tell me this student didn't learn anything this year, and this teacher went backwards with his student instead of teaching. It's not possible. And teachers assess every day. And so how you can compare last year's world history to this year's American history and come out with a comparison number because of a longitudinal data formula over a standardized test, it's ridiculous to think that. We're not using common sense as a government. We're not using common sense in Tennessee General Assembly, and it's time for people to put a stop to it.
No, I'm with you, but Larry, the main frame that the voucher people and the profiteers want is that public education's broken. Larry, you're a greedy teacher. You don't care about the kids. The system's broken. You're only in it for yourself, and our kids aren't learning. That's the frame that they want us to believe.
And they can, and you know what? Here's the advantage they have: money.
Tons of it.
That system has tons and tons of money, millions and millions and billions of dollars, through that American Legislative Exchange Council, through Bill Gates Foundation, through the Walmart family, through the Walmart Foundation, the Walton Foundation, and they take that money and they spend it and they tell the public that schools are broken. And I can tell you right now, I met a parent tonight for the first time. Her child's been in my class all year. And what I've watched this child do from the first of the year to the end of the year, and I told that parent, your daughter is why I am a teacher. Because of her progress in my class, to watch her eyes go from doubt to confidence is why I'm a teacher. It's not for a test. My statement to my students and to their parents all the time, I don't care about your grade, I care about your learning. They will correlate in a path somewhere along the way, but your learning is much more important to me.
And really the joy of learning and the love of learning, and I've talked about this before. I mean, some of the worst teachers I ever had, and I had some, were more focused on the numbers than they were about did I actually get it, and and did I enjoy what I was doing? Because you can't take a young kid and make them miserable and make them hate. And I go back to a nun I had. And it's a long time ago, but I was as a reader, I was a terrible out loud reader. So we're talking 5th grade. I didn't quite get that you took a breath at every comma, so I would run out of breath at the end of the sentences, and I was just a terrible out loud reader. And she used to make me get up every single day and read the longest passages because in her mind she was helping. But it was making me miserable, and I hated reading. It wasn't until years later that I actually came around to it and didn't despise it. And this is what I see this testing doing. It's making these kids who dread these tests, who dread the build-up, dread the whole process, dread being treated like criminals. And I fear that we lose them as they get older.
And you're exactly right. And so the answer to all that some of these legislators have, I heard this quote 2 years in a row, and this is not this year, because every time these tests fail, we have to have hearings in the summer to go back and say, hey, this isn't working. And I'm wondering when the Tennessee taxpayers are going to be fed up with using their money to pay for legislators to spend extra time in the summer studying a problem that they've yet to solve, and all they have to do are talk to the everyday teachers. Not teachers that are put into fellows programs by SCORE, a business roundtable, or by Beacon, another business roundtable, that are run by all these people that want to be in education now because it's a billion-dollar industry. I'm not teaching for the billions of dollars. I'm teaching for that next Steve Jobs. I'm teaching for that next young lady who might be the first president of the United States. I want to inspire these kids to light their fire and go show the world that there's light in their minds. But yet, I teach 8th grade U.S. history. I teach 98 standards in the year. We go to school for 36 weeks. You're asking me to teach children 3 in-depth standards to mastery in a week. So you're talking about you get a day and a half on each standard. And Rick, if you were to look at the curriculum of the state of Tennessee, you would find that laughable. I love history, and I love to help my children learn to appreciate history. But when you're having to push so quickly, there are not many detours where you can find those little moments of, oh, I understand. And this is why we need to change the world, because history is one of the most important subjects we study.
Yeah,
because
you're right.
we've yet to get it right, because we keep being cyclical and failing about how we approach the world.
Yeah, and I would argue part of all of this comes back to November. You know, every election cycle, I keep talking about, you know, this issue is important in November. This issue is important. Education is a central issue come every election, because where your legislator stands on vouchers, on charters, on privatization, on standardized testing, and you go down the list of all of this stuff, where they stand matters, because they're the ones who are making decisions and where they're getting their money. I mean, are they getting their money from the Koch brothers? Are they getting it from billionaire Betsy? Are they getting it from Gates or the Waltons? That stuff matters, because Education Incorporated is a powerful lobbying arm. They're a powerful electoral cash box. And this is where, again, Novembers matter.
Exactly. And that's why people have to sit up and they have to pay attention. You know, they shot part of the film, the documentary Backpack Full of Cash, here in Nashville at the legislature, and they interviewed some of the people here, teachers and school board members, and they explained, and Matt Damon does a good job of narrating. Of course, it was a well-done film that shows exactly why people are taking money out of our public school system. It's not to give up choice. It's really a ruse is what it is. And they're wanting to drain it because it's a profiteering thing.
Yep.
And you have these companies like Questar and Pearson. And you have all these companies that want to come in and they want to make all this money. And teachers, and I love my educator peers, but we're bad for not voting for our profession. And the profession is not greed. The profession is what takes care of our students. So when you don't do that, you're voting against your students. It is important to really know and understand. It shouldn't take a letter from a legislator who has a disconnect with his county's teachers and his district's teachers to upset everybody enough that they say, oh my gosh, look what's going on, when we've been ringing the bell for years and years.
Yep.
I'm a second career guy, so I'm finishing my 13th year, Rick. And in 13 years, the change has been unbelievable about how we approach our school day. There's hardly any recess. Play helps the brain develop, but we're more worried about testing and scoring than we are developing children to be complete citizens and adults.
Yeah, the grill and drill's gotten completely out of hand. But let me ask you a last line of questioning, because, you know, he hits on a frame that this state representative Kumar hits on a frame that some people buy into, and it goes back to that, you know, that parasite producer frame, that, you know, the winners and the whiners, the parasites, the producers, you know, just suck it up. Life's going to be tough, and you got to learn now. There's a certain mindset that thinks that's the right thing. We got to be tough on kids because, look, life's going to be tough, Larry.
Hey, life is going to be tough, and you know what? Children aren't going to be able to handle it because we're beating them down too early. I mean, life is going to be tough. We need to inspire children and teach them how to survive life instead of, look, I'm all for teaching children how to make it through things and how to go through it. But if you look in the countries that are so bent on testing, look at the rise in teenage suicide rates. I mean, look at countries like China, who have actually so much emphasis on testing that during some of their testing for college entrance into colleges after completing high school, they put intravenous feeds into students and pump amino acids into them. I mean, in Japan, teenage suicide is rising beyond belief, and it all correlates to how education has changed and become such a test monster. I got to spend a little time with a teacher from Finland this year, and Finland is one of those systems that everybody looks on as an innovator in education. You know, some of these national countries that people look out as the best are thinking about dropping out of the PISA, so they're not compared.
Right.
But Finland, through 8th grade, they require students so much play, to go out and climb trees and play. And teachers have to take time off. And it's just a whole different world. And when people want to compare you, but then they don't turn around and try to do the things that those countries of quality are doing, it's kind of an exercise in redundancy.
Yeah, no.
All we want to do is test, and spend billions on test. So we can tell you teachers, students, and schools are failing, and let's hand them over to people who are private-run organizations, and let's let them care about it. And let's sell these children out. And that's what we got to stop doing.
I'm right there with you, Larry. I appreciate the time. Best of luck come November. Love to have you back before the election.
Hey, man, I appreciate it. I'll be glad to talk to you anytime, Rick, and I appreciate you having me on tonight.
Good stuff.
You have
Love
a great evening, sir.
You too. Thanks so much. Good luck. Good luck on the trail. Larry Prophet, educator there in Tennessee and running for State House there in the 66th District there in Tennessee. You might want to check out his stuff. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to the Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1967. That was the day United Farm Workers Sons of Zapata joined with the Confederation of Mexican Workers in establishing an international picket line across the Rio Grande Valley. A push to organize farm workers at 6 major growers began the year before, in the spring of 1966. Wages in Starr County ranged from 40 to 85 cents an hour. Farm workers began their strike in June of 1966 for wage increases and union recognition. But growers would rather see their crops rot than recognize the union. They did grant wage increases, but immediately ran to the courts for injunctions. One district judge outlawed all picketing, while police instructed county workers to spray the strikers with insecticide. That August, workers voted to organize with the United Farm Workers and began a pilgrimage march to the state capitol to popularize their cause. 15,000 workers and their supporters reached Austin on Labor Day to demand their right to organize. They returned to Stark County to continue their strike. The growers turned to Mexican commuters holding green cards to break the strike. The United Farm Workers began picketing at Roma and Rio Grande City bridges and were often successful in turning back green card workers. By May 1967, melon harvest had begun. After months of negotiations, picket lines went up on both sides of the international bridges. The picketing was 100% successful for 2 days, but the Mexican government and Starr County Sheriff's Department soon intervened to break up the picket lines. Texas Rangers were brought in to arrest and brutalize strikers. The strike was broken, but organizing continued throughout the region. Picketing across borders was itself an important act of international solidarity. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So interesting quote from Chuck Grassley. You know, we can't give tax breaks to working people because they'll just spend it on booze and women and movies. Movies. He said, evidently, he's going to work to keep an election year Supreme Court vacancy open just like they did in 2016, if it happens in 2020. He says, but McConnell and Trump won't agree. And I got to be honest, anybody surprised by that? I mean, really, honestly and truthfully, and I don't even think Chuck Grassley's honest about it. But he said he was going to follow the quote unquote Biden rule if that comes around in 2020. Do you think any of the other Republicans would? I mean, honestly and truthfully, I mean, this is one of the greatest thefts in our modern politics. You completely swung the Supreme Court in what was and always had been. The president at that time has the right to nominate. The Senate has to do their job and advise and consent. And my problem with it, had they gone through the hearing process, had they gone through the whole confirmation process, and at the end voted him down, that's how it goes. They didn't even do that. And I said from the beginning, the reality is they were never going to give him an honest vote. They were never going to give him an honest hearing because, look, Garland was a very moderate justice. He would have been dead smack in the center. Liberals wouldn't have been thrilled with him. Conservatives wouldn't have been thrilled with him. Personally, I think he's the perfect person to put on the Supreme Court. I have never been thrilled with the idea of we're going to put someone who's so far to one side or the other that you have this massive ideological divide. John Roberts told us during his confirmation he was going to be middle of the road guy. He was going to call balls and strikes, believed in stare decisis, decided law. And yet here we are on the brink of deciding something that will destroy organized labor in this country. Will do irreparable harm. And they got away with it because, well, they stole the Supreme Court seat. And, Grassley's admission here is not surprising. This is who the Republican Party is. It's who they've always been. And this is the reason that Democrats have always ticked me off. And I've said this a bunch of times the average working class person wants somebody who's gonna be next to him in a street fight. They want someone who's got your back. They want somebody who they feel is going to help you, and not just offer to hold your coat. And a lot of Democrats have been the ones that go, "Oh, I'll hold your coat. Don't worry about it. You go ahead. I'll be over here." Most working class people don't view Democrats as fighters, and the Democratic Party had better figure out how to become the fighting party again. I look at that Supreme Court seat, and it's one of those defining moments, and I was saying it in 2016. The Republicans are going to steal this seat. It's going to happen. What are you going to do about it? And here we are. I was telling all my union friends, look, you need a reason to vote? You need a reason to vote for Hillary? That's it. Now we're going to have a Supreme Court that is decidedly pro-corporate. It is what it is. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to talk with Dan Albert. He's a candidate in really one of the most fascinating districts in the country, the South Carolina 4th. Trey Gowdy is out. He's gone, retiring. I guess he spent his years thinking everything was a waste of time. Now there are like 1,000 people running. So when we come back, I'm going to talk with Republican candidate Dan Albert about his views, where he wants to see the country go, what issues are important to him, and what he thinks his constituents want to see. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
7, yeah, and I'll go to work at night. I got no time for living, yes, I'm working all the time. It seems to me I could live my life a lot better than I think I am. I guess that's why they call me the working man.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
In September, the giant retail monopolist Amazon announced its intention to build a second corporate headquarters in someplace North America. Where's that? Aha! That's the trick in a corporate game called Fleece the Taxpayer. CEO Jeff Bezos demanded that every place submit a list of incentives they would pay to get Amazon to put what he calls HQ2 in their place. Yes, the haughty Amazonian royals actually commanded our public officials to bring all the jewels, gold, and other taxpayer booty they have and kiss Bezos's ring just to be considered for HQ2. In one stroke, taxpayers all across America were pitted against each other in a bidding war. Amazon even listed specific incentives that each supplicant should offer. First was a business-friendly environment. Then, urging hopefuls to think big when offering freebies, the directive demanded contributions of, quote, land, site preparation, tax exemptions, relocation grants, workforce grants, utility grants, and fee reductions. Surely, no self-respecting civic official would willingly play the sucker in such a demeaning sell-out-the-public scam. Officials from 238 cities, regions, and states have so far rushed to Bezos's corporate castle to woo and grovel in the perverse hope that Amazon might choose their taxpayers to rip off. This is Jim Hightower saying Amazon has announced that it has narrowed the actual contenders to 20 cities, so they will now be compelled to jack up their bribe offers. That's the whole purpose of the HQ2 game that this corporate huckster has been running on us. In fact, Amazon's site location team had decided from the start which half-dozen or so cities would be most profitable for the giant. The whole thing is a scamazon, snookering cities into a rigged game only Amazon can win.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So election season, heating up. Like I said, one of the more fascinating elections and races across the country is South Carolina's 4th. You got Trey Gowdy, who evidently thought he wasted his time, and I would tend to agree with him. You look at the Benghazi hearings. But now you've got like 100 people in this. I think there are 13 Republicans, 6 Democrats. There's a whole bunch of people that have thrown their hat into this. So I thought it'd be a good idea. Let's reach out to them and let's talk about the issues. Let's talk about their vision for America. And my next guest is one of those Republicans vying for the seat. Dan Albert has written the book, The Albert Plan to Save America. You can get it on Amazon, also on Kindle. It's his bold and comprehensive transformational plan. Dan, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, thanks for having me.
So we have this vision. We want to move the country in a direction because we think it's broken, right?
Yes, sir.
What's your number one issue?
Oh, my. You have to ask that, Rick. It's like a 55-gallon drum. And
let's start with voting rights then. You have an interesting constitutional amendment. Your book is a whole bunch of plans, a whole bunch of constitutional amendments you want to throw through on voting. Tell me your amendment there.
Well, it's based on the belief that I have that our elections no longer have integrity, and in order to restore integrity, we simply have to return to paper ballots. When I watched the Brexit election in Great Britain, and if you notice that they voted with paper ballots.
I'm with you on that. We agree on the paper ballots.
And then get rid of the early voting.
Why?
Get rid of the absentee voting.
Why do you want to make it harder for people to vote?
Well, it's not that I want to make it harder for people to vote. I want to make it harder for people to commit election fraud.
So do you believe that our system is riddled with fraud? You believe Donald Trump actually won the popular vote?
Well, I think that I believe that there were millions of illegal votes that were cast, and frankly, you just can't trust the system at all. You got counties and precincts and areas where they have more voters than there are registered more people vote than are registered to vote.
So you're saying there are tons of illegal aliens who are here voting. They're here in an undocumented fashion, and they're risking that vote. Okay. One of the things I did find interesting about your amendment is that you want everybody to have a photo ID, a very Republican plan. And look, I want everybody to be verified. I'm just curious how we go about that. Also, you want a right thumbprint put on the ballot. I found that fascinating. As someone who knows a lot of people who aren't fond of government, do you really want them to have your thumbprint, and do you really want your ballot to be identifiable of how you voted?
Well, we have to verify that people are citizens and that they're registered to vote and that they vote only one time. And we have there's so many encroachments on our privacy as it is. I think that it's reasonable for us to verify our identity, either with an iris scan or a thumbprint, some way that we can show up, get registered, then show up to vote. And instead of looking you up in the computer, they just scan your thumbprint or do an iris scan. And hey, if you don't want to be identified as an American citizen, that you're showing up to vote, then you maybe shouldn't vote.
Yeah, but do you really want? I mean, look, I'm a big supporter of government intervention and government doing things. I don't know that I want that kind of collection of data. I mean, that even freaks me out.
Well, Rick, I think that's a minimalist kind of encroachment compared to what we're seeing with the collection of all of our phone calls and emails
and we'll agree on that.
Yeah, and so basically there are ways that we can rein in the tyranny of big tech and stop them from collecting all this data. The government is complicit in this situation where they don't really want to shut Facebook or Google down from collecting all this information because really they'd like to have access to that information if and when they need it.
Sure. I mean, who are you more afraid of, the government or private industry?
Well, they say when the people fear the government, there's tyranny, and when the government fears the people, there's liberty. So, I know it sounds strange for a conservative, for somebody that's liberty-minded to say, hey, let's give up our thumbprint or let's do an iris scan. But how else can we verify that we just have citizens vote? And let the cards fall where they may. If a Democrat wins or a progressive wins an election, so be it. But we have to fix our integrity in our election, or we just won't have, our Constitution is.
I agree with you. I'm right there with you. Paper ballot. We're right on the same train there. That should be the minimal. Let's get into some things we might not disagree. We might not agree on. Let's talk about healthcare real quick. What's your plan for healthcare?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm glad you brought that up because I have a very simple solution, and that is we get the third-party payers out of the system. We get
Actually, agree on that.
Yeah, get government out of our health care and get insurance companies out. Why do we even need insurance? We really don't need health insurance.
Because health care is expensive.
It's expensive. And
it's always been expensive.
And it's because of the third-party payers.
That's a part of it, but it's still, you have a heart attack. It's a little more than people can weather, just out of their pockets.
You're absolutely right. And if we have no third-party payer, prices will collapse. So number one, you start with a much lower price level to begin with. And then when you have something catastrophic, it's easier for people to come to your aid. There are health sharing ministries. There's crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, GoFundMe accounts, that kind of thing. There's charity. We don't need the government to provide health care to us. We can take care of ourselves, take care of each other.
Okay.
And if we
so
get
just so I get this straight. So I'm with you on this. So I understand it. We're going to do the charity route. We're going to hope prices come down, and we'll see what happens. Here's the thing. Here's my problem with that. My problem is healthcare is one of those things that you don't get a second chance at. If I have a heart attack, I don't get the second chance of hoping charity helps me out. I want a well-staffed hospital. I want it to be regulated. I want people to have credentials. I want licensing. I want all of that stuff. And to do that, you have to have some government intervention, and you have to have some system that's going to, hopefully make sure that I don't have some, guy who got his license out of a Cracker Jack box. How do you get that in this quote unquote free market world of the way I'm getting it is almost a wild, wild west scenario?
Well, no, free market healthcare would be, LASIK surgery is really cheap because it's not paid for by a third-party payer. It's the same healthcare system. We built the best healthcare system in the world, and frankly, we give our veterans crumbs. We give them a substandard system, and if we just collapse everything into one system, and frankly, we take care of our veterans by just telling them, look, if you identify your problem is related to your service to our country, you're covered.
And that's the minimum we should do. But you said something there that grabbed my attention that I'll agree with. We should have one system. We should have one pot, one pool, basic insurance. The basic risk insurance is everybody in, lower the risk for everybody, and eventually, when you need it, it's there. But when you don't, you're still paying into a system that everybody benefits from. It seems, and it's not even, I don't even care if it's a private entity that does it. Everybody has to be into it. We can't have free riders in something that all of us are going to use at one point or another. I don't know anyone who's gone their entire life without going to the doctor or getting some form of health care.
Well, if you don't have a third-party payer system and people, the patient is, the single payer is the patient, then prices collapse. And instead of paying premiums, and you pay 30% copays, that's what the health care should cost. So you're paying a premium for nothing. You're still paying 30%. People can't afford their copays. And if you just get rid of a third-party payer, then 90% of people will be just fine taking care of their health care needs. And then when those issues do come up, then you've got things like Medishare or Liberty Health Share. You've got those kind of sharing ministries where people could pay a little bit every month to share everyone else's catastrophic expenses.
And that happens where?
I was part of a small church. We started up in Maine, and we set that up in the 80s with a small group of a couple hundred families, and it was a health sharing ministry. I mean, it's been around for decades.
And it's functional. It works. You've got cancer. We cover that.
Medishare, Liberty Health Share, Samaritan. There are large groups like that. It only takes, 5,000 people can spread healthcare risk. It doesn't take a lot of people to spread that risk.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm all in favor of the idea of having one giant insurance pool. So what you're saying is you want to see it done on a localized level. What do you do with people who can't afford it? My problem is I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland. I would have been in this world that you're laying out. I would have been one of the people dependent on charity or left behind on some level. What do we do with those folks? I mean, South Carolina is a very poor state. How much could you do there with that?
Well, if you unleash the free market like I want to do with my plan, and you just change a lot of other things besides healthcare, and we create unprecedented growth. We could double the real economy in 10 years, 7% compound annual real growth, and opportunities for people to work. And when people have jobs and they are active and people are healthier, and then when you have a healthcare need, there's so many ways, Rick, that without health insurance, by just having a free market healthcare system where prices collapse, all of those needs, the free market will take care of those needs. And then as a last resort, then government could step in and help the indigent. And that would be at the local level, not at the federal level. The federal government has no business being in health care. Other than to, drug, the Food and Drug Administration approving drugs, that kind of thing. We need to streamline.
Oh, so you're okay with that? You're okay with some government intervention?
The free market capitalist believes in limited, useful regulation. Useful regulation is very important. You can't have there's no such thing as an absolutely free market. You have to have some kind of limited, useful regulation to, we have stop signs for a reason. We drive on the right-hand side of the road for a reason. You have to have some kind of limited intervention. Well, the involvement of government is to make sure that bad drugs don't hit the market.
Right. We need to make sure people are safe. Make sure toys don't have lead in them. Make sure that we go down the list of all the things that, all the regulations that we have, you could make an argument for every one of them at one point or another, can you not? Because at some point it had to be a problem for them to go, hey, I think we should have a regulation of this.
Well, there's a limit. We went way past the reasonableness long ago on so many things, and we have to dial regulations back. Let people, like you're a teamster, you're a trucker.
Yep.
And they changed the laws 15 years ago or so, and you keep your logbook, and you can't. You're stuck in traffic on 495 heading through Massachusetts, going up to Maine, and oops, you're out of time. You have to lay over and go to sleep.
Yeah.
You're an hour away from home. They let doctors operate when they're dead dog tired. I mean, who stops a doctor from going too far when he's too tired?
It's a good question, but here's the thing: you've now compared two different things. I'm actually in favor of the regulations for truck drivers because there is a 2-hour exemption for emergencies if you're going back to your same domicile. The reality is truck drivers weren't responsible enough to not continually cheat on their logbooks, and a lot of them were running 2 and 3 logbooks, working 100 hours a week, and actually a danger on the road. So we weren't capable of, as a society of truck drivers, evidently, of following a code or our own laws, and people died because of it. I don't want to be on the road when your kids or your family are on the road with a tired truck driver who falls asleep and kills a bunch of people. And I hate those stories, but sadly that's what caused those regulations to be put in place.
And that's absolutely true, but there's a reasonableness factor that you have a little bit of stretch for those times when somebody's perfectly fine, but they're just an hour delayed getting home, and
So people know what you're talking about. You're talking about 14 hours of work, 11 hours behind the wheel. After 14 hours, you're advocating for a 15th or a 16th, and in some cases for special exemptions, because once a week you can have an emergency exemption. Make that 11 hours of driving into 16 hours. So you're actually talking about a 17th hour. Am I getting that right?
No, I'm not talking about anything that specific. I'm talking about if you're perfectly fine and you're half an hour from home, there's a reasonableness that kicks in there where a guy ought to be able to get home instead of having to stop on the highway to rest for. Sometimes I don't have all the laws like you might know off the top of your head, but
no, the only reason I say is because I'm a firm believer of you Republicans tell me all the time that there are job killing regulations, and I say that there are people killing lack of regulations. So where I hope we can agree, because the reason I have these conversations is I want to know where we can agree, because I think we both think that I hope we both agree that everyone should get health care when they need it. I think that we want safe roads. I think we want safe schools. I think we want good education for our kids. I think we want a safe country. I think we want the same things, just a matter of how you get there.
Yeah, and we can talk about education. That's a big topic right there that we probably disagree.
So you're anti-public education. I'm going to throw that right out there.
Absolutely. I think we're dealing with an antiquated system that what happens, Rick, when a child is young, the child is a sponge. They just absorb everything, and they're learning from everyone around them. And then we slow them down. We put them into a room with 15 other kids, and instead of having multiple teachers teaching that child, now they have one teacher in the front of a room teaching 15 or 20 kids.
Yeah, well, we could easily do that in the public education system if we funded it. Just kind of throwing that out there. Instead of spending a whole bunch of money on privatized testing and Education Incorporated, maybe throw that money back into the classroom, smaller class sizes. I want what Rahm Emanuel and what Barack Obama and Donald Trump has for his kids. I want the same education for your kid and for mine. We're not getting that.
Well, education, in my view, should be next to zero cost. We can learn anything online.
Oh, so you got a library card. Good luck, kid.
No, you have education is, public education is broken into education, indoctrination, and daycare. And we can do a better job of educating our kids with distance learning. And the daycare is a function that can be handled differently, and then we would disagree on the indoctrination. I think public education is all about indoctrination.
It's not about maybe being the glue that holds society together, that we identify with one each other and we learn from diverse cultures, and we're not into that.
No, I think education is intentionally dumbing down our kids so that we have a bunch of sheeple running around, just very compliant folks that just are we're heading toward a new world order where there are going to be just a few elites that have the power and the control and the wealth, and the rest of us are simply serfs. Do you see that coming?
Well, isn't that always been? I mean, honestly and truthfully, let me ask you the last line of questioning, because I got to. I would love to sit down and have a beer with you. I think that would be an exercise and just in stimulation. Labor unions, got to throw this out here. And I'm certain that you're probably anti-labor union. Give me your thought.
Absolutely anti-labor. When I was a kid, I grew up in a small paper mill town up in northern Maine. And at 9 years old, a kid doesn't understand why they had the car on fire on the railroad track, stopping the train from leaving the mill, And so I learned a little bit at that time. And then when I went to work as a spare in the mill in the summers between college, I'm sitting there at the table. We got nothing to do with, the midnight shift, and at the end of the conveyor, these rolls of paper were piling up. And so I just rolled them over and put them on the conveyor, and they went down the line, and a shop steward came over, and he had his little book in his pocket, and he shakes that at me and tells me I'm taking somebody's, half day away from someone. And I was an 18-year-old kid, 19-year-old kid, just doing what I thought was the right thing. And I had the liberty to do it. He couldn't shut me down from saving the company a half day of wages on a laborer. So there's a mentality that is just foreign to me. And it's not an us versus them kind of thing. I think labor is too focused on an adversarial relationship.
No, labor's focused on getting the best conditions for their workers, the best wages that they can get for their workers, sharing in the wealth that they create for the employer. I think that's what labor fights for: better wages, hours, conditions for their members. And sharing in the wealth that their labor, that the sweat of their brow, the ache of their back, that they produce. I think that's the reality in that. And if you had a negative experience, I'm sorry, but the reality is the only way that labor gets a fair share is by organizing and by having the only power they have is to fold their arms and march in the streets.
Well, I don't believe that's true. That's fundamentally, we have a fundamental disagreement there, because I'm a firm believer in the reward of someone's labor. That's a biblical concept that we're entitled to the fruit of our labor. And frankly, government is too involved in taking away the fruit of our labor. But why, if organized labor offers such a service to their constituents, then why do you have to have a monopoly in order to do it?
Well, you don't have to be a member. Not even in this day's law, you don't have to be a member. So you have exclusive bargaining rights, and you negotiate a contract, and everyone is covered by it. The only difference is you can't have free riders. You have to pay for the negotiation until the Supreme Court, which I'm certain you're against, and I wish we had time to argue this, which I'm certain you're against the Supreme Court using its power as a bludgeon over 22 right to bargain states. But that's something we'll have to talk about next time. Dan, it was really great talking with you. I hope people will check out your website, danalbertforcongress.com. Get the book, Albert Plan to Save America. We'll get links and send them out. Dan, I appreciate your time, man, and good luck.
Great talking to you, Rick. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Very good stuff. Let's take a quick break. Right back with your thoughts. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. Are you fascists or bound to lose?
Oh, that was fun. Yeah, I love having discussions with people that I fundamentally disagree with on every point, and Dan's one of those guys. And you know, I read through his PDF, and the positions are pretty remarkable. Complete believer in the free market, and look, I respect that. I don't agree with it, but I respect it. That's why I think November is so very important. What you heard is kind of the Republican thought. Now I think he's a little bit even further to the right than they are right now. Yeah, I would argue he's probably a little more libertarian than current conservative, but still on that path. And this is why, again, November is so important. Do you want that world? Do you want that country that says, you know what? Good luck. If you can't afford health care, maybe charity will help you. Maybe we'll get a ministry or a mission that'll come help. You know, no government intervention. You know, well, some regulations, but only the ones that we think are good. And you could go down the list. I mean, there was a bunch of stuff that I wanted to talk about. But in 20 minutes, you only get so much. And I'm sorry I wasted some of it on my personal my personal pet peeves. But, you know, the voting one, you know, you heard right there, he believes firmly that there were millions of people who voted illegally. And while I'm with him on the idea of returning to a paper ballot, I think that's something that liberals, conservatives, you know, people on the middle, I think everybody agrees on. To me, have your machines, but there has to be a paper trail. And it's the paper ballots that count. Yeah, tabulate because we need to know right now who wins, but the paper gets counted and verifies the electronic. This way we get our instant gratification, but it's still accurate. I'm a little freaked out about the thumbprint. That's kind of weird to me, but hey, you know, it's his thought. The other thing that I didn't get to do with him, and I honestly, I'd love to have a conversation because he was civil. And there's a lot of people who have, you know, these views who aren't civil. They want to argue and they want to pound their fist and scream at you. And I thought Dan was great. And I hope the people of South Carolina will take a look at his campaign, especially on the Republican side. But the gun issue, and I got to throw this out here because, you know, he has taken the gun issue from a constitutional right to a God-given right. Evidently, God wants us to have guns, and I wanted to ask him about that, but we will most certainly get to it. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. As always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. Tune in Saturday night, 8 o'clock, right here for our Free Speech TV Overtime with Rick. Thanks so much.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's covered like time flood beneath the lunar sway, imperial